Hello, and welcome to Faith Adventures for Children Together, the new resource from the United Reformed Church for any groups engaging with children and families in any way at all. This session, we'll talk you through a sample resource, showing why we write it in the way we do and how you might use it to support your ministry to children and families, whether that be through Sunday school or junior church, through Messy Church, through pilots groups, through other children's groups, intergenerationally, or if you just are able to send something home, maybe with a grandparent for their grandchildren. So sit back and enjoy and find out more about Faith Adventures for Children Together. It's a free resource that we're providing, and we will be providing 4 weeks of the resource in one go to help with planning, and they'll be available a month in advance. So that's a free resource that you can use for all sorts of reasons. So we wanted to make it a very URC Children Together resource. We want it to be Bible based. So every issue is based on a passage from the Bible, encouraging children together to experience the story, explore it in new ways which relate to their daily life experience, and express their own response. We want it to be creative and playful. That was really important to us, because the essence of childhood is creativity and playfulness, and they're the best way for our scriptures to come to life for children, and actually, if we're honest, for adults too. How often is it that you're there in church and they do a children's address, and actually that's the bit of the service you remember at the end of the day? We want it to be inclusive and accessible, because God's love is for all. So this resource aims to be accessible to all children, regardless of their age, their gender, their churchedness, their wealth, their education, their physical or their cognitive needs, their locality. We try very, very hard to make sure that everything that we include is accessible to any child in some way, that there's something there for them. We aim to foster a God connection, to encourage and enable children and adults to talk and listen to God, and to become friends of Jesus for themselves. And it's really important to us that it is URC unique. There are lots of resources out there, but this is written primarily with URC children in mind. That's not to say we stop anybody else from using it, and you've got to prove your membership to be allowed to access it. But we wanted the things which are really fundamental to the URC. So there's a focus on social justice and walking the way, focus on the Bible, inclusivity, and an encouragement to develop a personal understanding that might differ from that of others, but is still accepted and respected. And those are the things that we feel are fundamental to our denomination. So why this? Why now? So this was based on feedback that we had from families on Faith Adventures at home. We ran that for about just under 3 years. It was really well received, but we found that once the lockdown was over, we suspected, and then we did a bit of investigating and found out that it was true, that churches were no longer sending it out to families because they were keeping it to use in their own sessions. And we thought, well, if that's happening, why don't we actually write something for them to use in their own sessions that then includes something that they can send home? We wanted to resource URC Children, which was launched last year, with an aim of creating a sense of identity for children within the URC, United Reformed Church, especially those children that are just there as 1 or 2 children in a very adult environment, so that they felt part of something bigger. and also promoting their participation at all levels. We wanted to resource our churches and groups and to support children and youth-friendly church schemes. And we wanted to enable children to play their part in the mission of God. Now, everybody who looks at this will be looking at it from a different starting point. And we want to really emphasize that this isn't a prescriptive scheme. It's not something where you've got to do this, 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 and this. You'll need to look at it with these things in mind: the setting you're in, the resources that are available to you, the age of the children, obviously, the amount of time you've got with them. Very importantly, their interests and abilities and your group size. So when you come into using the resource, have those things in mind and think, will this particular bit work well for my children in my setting? Do I need to adapt it? Do I need to pass on and do something different there? So our resource is in 4 main parts with 2 additional parts. We want this to be something that anybody could pick up and run with. So we provide some help before you start to plan. Then we've got 4 sections: together, experience, explore, and express, which we'll be telling you more about in a minute. And that really important thing, the postcard home, is how we're going to link what those children do in their half an hour a week with you to what they're doing at home during the rest of the week, which obviously is the largest part of their time. So this is where we'll find it. It's on the United Reformed Church website. So we're not going to email it out. It's not going to be a subscription. You'll need to go and find it yourselves. So if you go to your faith, families, children and young people, you will see that we've got URC children, children and youth work, that's for general resources, URC youth, and then we've got faith adventures for children together. And as we scroll down, we have a how-to sheet. That's basically what we're sharing with you today. Then, for example, for April, which is already up, we have session outlines and postcards home for 4 weeks worth of sessions, all coming under a very loose title. So a loose theme that they're sort of connected with. It's not a sort of a dictatorial theme at all, but they're loosely connected under a theme. But we're going to look today at our sample copy. And here is our sample session. So each week it will come, you'll see they're colour coded and they've got an icon to tell you a little bit more about the theme. So the theme for the sample is light. And I'm going to hand over to Ruth, who's going to tell us a bit about the first section on there.
Thanks, Lorraine. In the previous slide, you would have noticed that in 1 month, Lorraine is very good with us as a writing group. She makes sure that in those 4 weeks, we will cover something from the Old Testament, a passage from the New Testament, one of the epistles, and a psalm or similar. And that's a commitment. And we also don't shy away from passages. So I think we're quite proud as a group that and in the previous resource, we are covering stories that you wouldn't normally find in a children's resource, because we're not shying away from any part of the Bible. Although there is one story that we keep avoiding at the moment, but I'm sure we'll do it eventually. Okay, so on with this one, the Transfiguration. The overall theme within this is exploring who Jesus is by spending time with Jesus. And when we gather to write as a writing group, we will start by looking at the passage ourselves and we have a conversation. It's a bit like a Bible study. It's one of my favourite parts of my week, in fact. We have our own Bible study together before we start thinking, so what would we do with children in a session around this passage? What are the opportunities to be creative and so on? So our conversation with this one took us to, well, this is about exploring who Jesus is and all the things that we're talking around with our Bible study in preparation to plan the session. We would then pull those threads out and put them in this first section, which is the introduction. What would help you as the session leader in your planning? And we try and put in there a little bit about the book it's coming from. So this one's from the book of Matthew. So it will tell you a little bit about the book of Matthew. It will put it into the context of the time as well. It might give you some background to what was going on when Matthew wrote this. It will give you the heads up to anything that we think might be a trigger for children or leaders within this passage. Not so much in this particular episode, I'm noticing. And anything else that we think you need to be aware of. I think the best part of this bit, in fact, the whole resource, is if you're developing leaders or if you've got some young leaders who you're developing, right from the word go with this introduction, we're gently supporting people who are having to pull a session together. Hopefully it's coming across that way. And the last thing I would say is this will give you the heads up as to where we're going with the theme from that passage and why, and what it might be worth exploring with your group. And I'm going to hand over to Judy for the next bit.
So we move on to together, being together, and it is what it says. It's a time where you gather your group together and you do some familiar things. So we have a gathering prayer, which we've written. And there is also a prayer with actions and Makaton later on in the resource, which you can access as well. And that's a time where we're grounding everything in prayer. And you can use either of those prayers, or you can use one that you want to use yourself. We're not going to say you have to use this. You've got something that you are more familiar with and you use as a group regularly, use that. That's okay. So we gather them together, and it's a good time to just welcome newcomers, get to know everybody who's here, and do all of that aspect of things. And then we've got a couple of games which we would want to play. An in-person game. We suggest an in-person game, and it'll be based around the theme. And it gets everybody loosened up and ready to go and to delve a bit deeper into the session. There is also an online game, and that's something that we're really keen for people to tell us if they're still using online things, and if you are, is it a benefit for you? But I would say a lot of the online games you could use in person as well. So you've got a choice. But again, it's not prescriptive. If you feel you've got a better game that would fit better for your group, you know your children and young people. So it is really good that you can think, right, actually, I think that game would be better for us. So don't feel like you have to. These are just suggestions and ideas, but it does get everybody limbered up and ready to really get into the resource itself. And I'm going to hand over to Leo, where we're going to talk about experiencing it.
Thanks, Judy. As you've probably gathered by now, FACT is not lectionary based, although potentially over the coming months and years, when you look at the archive, you might be able to find sessions that match up with the lectionary reading for that day. What it is it takes you on a wild romp through the Old Testament and through the New Testament. And I think we were talking about how we start off with a Bible study. A really important part of that Bible study for our planning meetings is deciding actually which version, which translation of the Bible actually uses the language that allows us to develop the theme most effectively. So we will always recommend a particular translation of the Bible that we think works best. But of course, if you have a preferred translation or your children are used to a particular translation, then feel free to use that if you want. Just make sure, we would ask you please, that the words are inclusive and that God is referred to as God rather than him all the time, and stuff like that. To support that engagement with the Bible, we'll provide you with some examples of where you can find the Bible story online. One normally aimed at younger people, and one then for slightly older children. These are very often cartoons or storytellers telling the Bible story themselves. And then to allow a further engagement with the story and with the theme, there are a couple of songs that we would recommend. They will almost always be available on YouTube. And again, there will be a song that we think is suitable for 0 to 5s, and then a song that is more suitable for 5 to 11s. Although, of course, you know your children best and you know what will work with them. So if you think your older children might actually like singing the younger children's song, please don't feel that by us suggesting one age range that is being prescriptive. It's not. You know your children, so you make sure that you know what works with them and use what is most effective for you to engage them with the Bible story and the theme of the week. But having engaged, we go on to explore, and Ruth is going to tell us more about that.
So this will look different each week over the course of the month, and in the wider scheme of the whole resource as well. We try and give you as many different ways and methods of exploring the Bible passages with your groups as we can. So it's not going to be same every week, it's worth saying at this point. Ideas and activities then to help you and your group explore the passage together and really start unpacking the passage and unpacking the theme. In this episode, we've written a brand new story. So we've looked at the Transfiguration story and we've said, what would be a modern version of that if we were to rewrite it for children to engage with a new story? And so we've had to go at writing one here. But it might not be a new story. It might be a poem. It might be ideas for your group to retell the story themselves. It depends what the story passage is that we're grappling with. It could be that we've given you an example of a way to annotate the psalm, if it was a psalm, to pull that psalm apart and explore it, perhaps with art or with annotating on a big sheet of paper as a group. So whatever the theme, we'll try and be as creative as possible to encourage you and enable you to get creative as you explore the story and the theme with your group. We will also always put one modern parable in here. Now, if you are used to using FOFA, I always get my names confused now, which was the original resource that we wrote in lockdown with a different aim, you will recognize some of these things because we've taken what worked well there and built on it. So modern parables might be one that you're familiar with now. It's a story that children may be familiar with. It's a modern story. It's normally a storybook. We'll put a link to it being read or animated online. And this one is What is God Like? But sometimes it's an actual storybook, children's storybook that you might find in a school library, for example. So just as Jesus did with stories, modern day story that people would be familiar with that explores the same theme. Next, you'll find 2 different styles of wondering questions, 2 questions in each style. So the first one, talking together, that would be 2 big questions which are about the passage or the story. And they would be wondering questions that we would grapple with as a group in the session. Then we've also given you 2 wondering questions that you're more likely to use one-to-one when you're just sat perhaps doing an activity or something creative or a craft, and you're just having these chat conversations, normally where they can be more personal. So each episode will give you 2 that you can do as a group based on the passage, and 2 that you could do sat side by side with somebody whilst you're getting busy. and Lorraine will explain what on earth is in that box.
Yes, what's in the box is primarily aimed at under fives, although it's not restricted to them. You, particularly if you have children with additional needs, they may find this a good way into the story. What we do is we have a box or a bag that's a special box or bag. It's the same one that we bring out every week, and we make a little bit of a ritual of that, maybe with a song about what's in the box. And then pull out the items that are in there one at a time and let the children play with them and talk a little bit around the theme and the story in very simple terms. So as we've got here, we're doing the transfiguration. So we might have something that is about light, and you might play with it with the child. Torches are brilliant to play with children, and include some of the language there. And you might have a cushion because they all felt very sleepy, and you might talk about curling up on the cushion and going to sleep. So they're all things which are linked with that story, and we'll get that sort of theme across, that are good to handle and play with. And we always have a set of play people to act out the story, or some random shapes or bits that you can move around to form pictures from the story. So we really recommend using sort of fabrics and natural things like twigs and leaves that you can use to form those pictures. So that's our what's in the box. It's a much more sensory, multisensory approach. And then I hand over to myself here. I'm doing the next bit too. So we come then to expressing, a chance for the children to develop their own way of expressing their response. And first of all, we do that through prayer. It's very traditional, isn't it, in children's groups, for children to be prayed at, really. I'm sure none of you do that, but I know my own experience as a child was to sit there while a grown-up said a prayer, and I was expected to say amen at the end, whatever it was they'd said. But we want to approach prayer so that it's coming from the children, and so they themselves take a lead or are certainly well involved in the prayer. So it may look different to what you expect in the form of prayer, because we will always have a creative style of prayer here, the creative transforming cloud prayers. So it's something that the children can actually do as a form of prayer. And we'll also have a spoken prayer. Sadly, this one isn't an overly good example, because what we do tend to do is to involve the children in that spoken prayer too, maybe with actions, maybe with a response, maybe with them having an opportunity to contribute a part of that spoken prayer. So there'll be a creative and a spoken prayer. Suggestions, and as we've said again, not prescriptive, do it your own way. If you've got a better way, please, that's absolutely brilliant. Another part of express is a more active, creative expressing, and I'm going to hand over to Judy for that.
So when we are trying to get the children to express things, we want them to explore and express the theme of the story in a variety of ways. We are producing just now a creative response, a craft response. So there will be a creative response, which will be a craft. It's worth saying that the crafts are not things that you would have to go and buy very expensive things to create them. They're everyday objects. So it will be things that you generally have around that you could to create things. We're not expecting churches to go out and spend an awful lot of money on expensive resources. So we create something as a creative thing. And then there is also a STEM response. And that might be an experiment, it might be a recipe, it might be just something a bit different to engage children who maybe don't want to do craft. And your group might be actually more interested in doing an experiment or something. For the example, this one, we're making magnifying glasses. And so we do that as a expression of the response into the theme. I would say we don't want to, again, prescribe to that. So I would always say have a range of other things. So it might be Lego. It might be that you've got a range of creative things that children can just go and express and respond in their own way. And also maybe a colouring sheet that some children might actually feel that they want to go and colour as well. We would never say go and use the colouring sheet as a creative response, but it is a different way to respond. And so we do provide that, because recognising that there are some children who would actually respond in that way quite well. It should never just be used as a way to quickly fill that gap, but as an alternative way of responding. And so we've got the two different kind of ways of responding. And then I'm going to hand over to Leo to tell us, Lorraine
I think
again.
this is me again. What's really important to us is that what we do in that one session doesn't finish the minute that you walk out of the door. And so we want to encourage our children to walk the way, to extend their discipleship into their daily life. With many children, they could probably come up with some really good ways of doing this. But if they're not at that point yet, or you're not at that point yet, then we give you two possible challenges that you could give them to do during the week. So with this example, we've been learning about finding out who Jesus is. And so maybe they could put together some questions that they could use to find out about who somebody else is, somebody new. Or maybe they could talk to somebody older or younger and get them to tell you something that they may not already know about Jesus. So that's just to get them thinking at home and at school about the things they've been learning and acquiring during their sessions. So now we're going to hand over to Leo, and I'm going to nip back to our sample and open up the sample postcard home. Leo.
Thanks, Lorraine. I don't think I've ever met a children's worker who at some stage in their ministry hasn't worried about the fact that they're maybe a little bit hit and run. Because we know that children spend far more time out of church than they do in it. We only have them for a very brief time. So what we wanted to do was to ensure that this resource gave us an opportunity to equip and encourage the families to express and explore their faith when they're not in church. And part of that is done through walking the way. But the postcard home is a nice little aid memoir that will enable the children to take something home. And we know that children come from different contexts. Some are going to have families that are very supportive of them in this, and others may be unsupported in their faith at home and want something that they can do on their own. The postcard is a way of doing that. It's designed to give them simple take-home activities that they can maybe suggest prayer ideas, questions on which they can ponder, and easy activities that are on the theme for them to do. And of course, even if you don't run the sessions, or even if you don't have children at the sessions, it may be that you know members of your congregation who do have children at home who aren't at church, or do have grandchildren that come and visit. And the postcard is a great thing to pass on to them so that those conversations can continue, and that discipleship and that faith exploration can continue to develop whilst they're not at church, whilst they're not under our care. So that's the resource. One of the things that I don't think we've said yet is that everything that we put in this has been tried and tested with children themselves in a range of different contexts, from big junior churches to small messy churches. So you know that the things that we are suggesting you try do work.
So thanks to those members of the team that were able to join us to share a little bit about Faith Adventures for Children Together. We are hoping in September to extend what we're writing. We're meeting to plan how we could develop this resource for those of you who are working with the 11 to 14 age range, maybe on their own or maybe in a mixed age group. And so we'll be looking at taking the theme that we use for that week's fact and extending it with maybe some deeper questions, some more challenging activities, so that 11 to 14 age range that's so often missed out in church resources, so that they are given something that's appropriate for their age range. So now let's hear about a little bit more about some of our other resources. For Children Together, we have some merchandise. I haven't changed the price on the badge, but they're a little bit more than that, not a lot more. But we do have some really lovely bags for URC children, and also some sew-on badges, which are perfect for camp blankets or to sew on your hoodie or wherever you choose to use them. And where these have been used so far, they've been really enthusiastically received. So those are available just by emailing us, and we can arrange to have them sent out, or to contact your SIDO, who may have some that they will sell on or pass on. So that's just to raise awareness of those. And we also have some links here you may want to make a note of. We've set up a Facebook group for Faith Adventures for Children Together. And what we're hoping is that, first of all, we can use it to share extra little bits with people. But what we're really hoping is to build a bit of a community around it, so that people who use the material maybe give us some feedback, maybe show some photographs of things that the children have made or done, share their own ideas if they did something a little bit different. So we'd really like to build that up. So if that's something that interests you, please do join the Facebook group. And we've made a nice simple link for that. The materials are there on fact_resource as a bit.ly link, if you want to bookmark that so that you can find them quickly. I've put there the link for Families on Faith Adventures at Home. As I said, that resource is staying online, and there's about 2.5 to 3 years worth of materials there. And what we're also doing for that is making a compilation of the craft activities and a compilation of the prayer activities, which, you know, if you're just looking for a way of doing a little bit of creative prayer, you should be able to find them hopefully fairly quickly on there. And of course, we do a lot of other materials, including our holiday club that we're in the middle of writing right now. And those materials are on our resources page. And so I hope that in this session, you've seen something that sparked your interest to send you going looking straight away on the website for Faith Adventures for Children Together. We hope that you will give us some feedback, let us know what you think of it, what's useful to you and what isn't. And last but not least, maybe you have a skill for writing material for children. Maybe it's something that God is calling you to do. We would love for more people to join us on our writing team. It's made up currently mostly of children and youth work development officers or their equivalent, myself as Programme Officer for Children and Youth Work, but we also have a volunteer who joined us saying, could I maybe do a little bit of story writing, and is now a valued part of the team, having grown in experience and expertise through working on families on faith adventures at home with us. So maybe that's something that you might be interested in doing, maybe joining us as a guest writer for a couple of months, working alongside one of the people already on the team, exploring what you might be able to offer. We would love to keep our team fresh and to help you build up some of your skills and get a little bit wider experience writing for a wider audience. So please do get in touch if that's something you feel that God is calling you to do. But all that's left is for me to say thank you so much for all that you do in your ministry to children and young people and their families, because you're the people who are really making the difference. So take care, God bless, and keep up the good work.